Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to the monthly Journal of Expressive Writing feature and open mic. We're so glad you're here tonight. We're going to hear from at least 15 writers in the open mic. We have a wait list and 15 writers after we hear from our wonderful feature, memoirist Hendrika de Vries, who's going to be reading from her memoirs for us tonight. Now, we're so glad you're here. I just want to remind you that the open mic is sign up in advance only on the website. And we hope that you have signed up in advance. Katarina Conan is the person here with us tonight who wonderfully helps us with our lineup of the open mic and paying attention to who's here, who's not here, to help out Katarina in knowing whether or not you're here for the open mic. Please make sure your little Hollywood square has your name in it, the name you signed up for to read, okay? Your reading name. Then she'll know how to find you. So if you don't know how to rename yourself, just direct message Katarina in the chat room, and she will be glad to help you do that. And Katarina, thanks for coming. Anything else you want to say to our wonderful crowd tonight?
Yeah, the other thing that's helpful is if you are reading, it's good to turn your camera on before your name comes up on the list because that helps me to spotlight you at that time. And by the time we've reached the open mic, we will no longer be recording. So if being recorded is a concern that's making you turn your camera off at the moment, by the time we get to the open mic, that won't be a concern anymore.
And I am going to thank you, Katarina. I am going to turn the recording off after Hendrika's reading so that it doesn't record the open mic. Occasionally, my finger forgets, and I just want to let you know that I edit out the open mic before I post the feature, just so you know. All right. Oh, good. Maureen is here. Maureen Murdoch is here, and I mentioned that. I'm grateful for that you're here, Maureen. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Maureen, welcome. I'm putting you on the spot because I want to thank you, and I think we're all going to be thanking you tonight because you're the one that told me about Hendrika. I know that you two are friends, and you told me about Hendrika and her writing and her books, and you urged me to look into them, and of course I did, and I thank you, and that's why she is here with us tonight. So thanks, Maureen. You can unmute if you want there for a second. I'll just
Hi, both Kelly and Hendrika. It's so great to see both of you, and you're all in for a big treat listening to Hendrika. So,
thank you and fully agree with you. And I don't know if I mentioned the date stamp, time stamp yet, but it is March 26th, 2026, for the record. All right. And I'm also really excited to remind you, for those of you who are in the open mic, that we limit our readers to 3 minutes. And so if it would be great if you could just really focus on prepping, doing whatever you need to do so that you know I have a 3 minute piece that I brought here tonight. And occasionally I will have to interrupt someone if it goes, it starts to go over 3 minutes. We really try to end on time. And so I may have to give you a little nudge and let you know that your time is up. Never take it personally. Please come back next time. You're always welcome to sign up for the open mic. Jen will open the registration for the open mic, usually within days after, if not sooner than our next feature, which is going to be on April 30th in um, next month. But that isn't open yet. But let me introduce you, for those of you who don't know her already, Jennifer Minotti, the founder of the Journal of Expressive Writing and its editor and our generous facilitator of all the information, all the registrations, all the back end and the front end of how we gather each week. So thank you, Jen. I know you want to say hello to everybody tonight.
I do. Hi, everybody, and thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Kelly, for this magnificent open mic portion of the Journal of Expressive Writing. It was Kelly's brainchild, and I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful to have Hendrika here with us tonight, a fellow swimmer. Yay, and a fabulous one, and amongst many other things. And I'm just so thrilled to be here with all of you. I want to just say one thing. People always ask me like about the signups for the open mic portion because it's kind of become like concert tickets. Sometimes it goes within like 2 hours. It's so wonderful. The fastest way to be alerted because I don't always know when I'm launching it is to make sure that you're on the Journal of Expressive Writing's mailing list, which you can subscribe on the website. And the other thing you can do is follow on Eventbrite, the Journal of Expressive Writing, because as soon as I publish it on Eventbrite, which is where people sign up, you'll get a message about it. And so that is actually the very fastest way, first way to find out about it. So just wanted to give all of you people here that little tip. um, yeah, and thank you.
Hmm. Okay, thanks, Jen. Just one other thing, we keep the chat room open throughout our evening. I think it's really important to our community, and it really gives you a chance to mention anything that comes up that a writer is reading that you really love, identify with, appreciate, or even have a question about. Feel free to put that in the chat room. I'm so happy to introduce our reader for tonight, our feature, Hendrika de Vries. I'm going to go ahead and formally introduce you, Hendrika. So hang in there. Hendrika is the author of When a Toy Dog Became a Wolf and the Moon Broke Curfew, an award-winning memoir about her childhood in Nazi-occupied World War II Amsterdam, where she lived just a few blocks from Anne Frank's hiding place. Her life experience with oppression and resistance in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, migration, competitive swimming, misogyny in 1950s Australia, and feminism in the US infuse her writing with historical depth and personal perspective on challenges facing women and anyone deemed other. Her recently published second memoir, Open Turns, From Dutch Girl to New Australian, is set in 1950s Australia. It tells her coming of age story as a strong-willed immigrant girl and champion swimmer who has definite opinions on the woman she intends to be as she struggles to belong and find her identity in a new country. And it's wonderful because Hendrika is going to read to us from both of those books tonight. She's going to give us a little introduction to her second book, but we're going to mainly focus on When a Toy Dog Became a Wolf and the Moon Broke Curfew. Hendrika is a retired Jungian-oriented family therapist and professor. She helped clients and students explore the archetypal patterns in their life journeys. She's been invited nationally to speak at schools and public events. She's a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She lives in Santa Barbara with her husband. Let me just tell you a tiny bit about When a Toy Dog Became a Wolf and the Moon Broke Curfew. Um, the publisher has written, how does a girl become an empowered woman? Born when girls were to be housewives and mothers, a Dutch daddy's girl in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, she learns about female empowerment when her father is deported to a POW camp in Germany and her mother joins the resistance. Freedoms taken for granted are eroded with escalating brutality by men with swastika armbands who aim to exterminate those they deem inferior and those who do not obey. Don't let them make you afraid, her mother says, when their city is plunged into darkness in the final months. The warmth and the light will return. As mother and daughter fuse in a symbiotic bond, she absorbs her mother's strength and faith. She learns about moral choice and forced silence. Her hidden Jewish stepsister is betrayed and her mother interrogated at gunpoint. mother and daughter, suffer near starvation and narrowly escape death on the day of liberation. Welcome, Hendrika de Vries. Thanks for being here with us tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you, Maureen, for connecting me with Kelly. And this is a real honor. Especially in today's world, it's a real honor to be speaking about my time as a child in a world where we kind of looked at what inspires our strength, our resilience, and our hope in the midst of hatred, violence, and despair. And I had a hard time picking a chapter out of my book, and I decided to focus on place. How does place, when violence and hatred take over, how does place impact, especially children? Since I was a child when all this happened. So I'm going to read chapter 16 from my book, and it's called A City of Death. It had been almost 2 years now since my dad left us, and in his absence, our beautiful Amsterdam, the city with its stately 17th century homes and tree-lined canals along which he loved to stroll, had become a dirty, treeless city that stank of death and decay. Emaciated old men, women, and children, some with distended bellies from hunger edema, struggled to last one more day, and perhaps another, and another if they were lucky. Even though it was almost springtime, the brutal winter weather had not loosened its grip. To the east of Amsterdam, the Allied forces had already liberated many cities, but our northwest corner of Holland lay abandoned and forgotten, imprisoned in the relentless Nazi grip of death. On my way to school, I kept my eyes down and my woolen hat pulled over my ears so I could not hear or see the overwhelming despair and ugliness of the city that surrounded me. But I was never able to escape the stench of it. My mother told me I had a sensitive nose, but I didn't know what to do about that. And she, who always had an answer for everything, offered me no solution. And honestly, the smells made me gag. My daily trek to school down the canal took me past the sulfur heaters that had been placed along the canals to provide some modicum of relief for the people of Amsterdam, who were now dying at alarming rates from cold and starvation. The heaters that emitted a stench of rotten eggs were a gathering place for old men. At least in my 7-year-old mind, they were old men. They were the leftover men, the men who were too old to be sent to the work camps in Germany, too old, too sick, or in too deep a despair to bother to go into hiding or be part of the resistance. Bent over and diseased from hunger and freezing cold homes, disheveled in old worn-out clothes, their bodies unwashed due to lack of soap and warm water. They were the men who had been left behind, of no use even to the cavernous appetite of war. Deprived of all hope and human dignity, many of them urinated out in the open, where the smell of their urine mixed with their stale body odors and the stench of the rotten eggs that emanated from the sulfur heaters. Old men are disgusting, I told my mother one day after school, a comment to which she did not respond kindly. You need to feel sorry for them, she lectured me. They're old and sick, and they're cold and hungry. The heaters give them a little relief from their suffering. Yeah, but they don't have to pee in the street. I wrinkled my nose in judgment. Oh, Henny, my mother sighed.
They have lost the will to live. You are too young to understand. Try not to look at them or think about it, she urged. So, like the proverbial three wise monkeys whose hands covered their ears, their eyes, and their mouth, I learned, along with many of the children in my school and neighborhood, to tune out the sights, the sounds, and the words of war's assault on human dignity. At least I tried hard not to see evil, hear evil, or speak evil. But I'd be darned if I could avoid the smells. Over time, the kids I knew had all gotten used to the rolled barbed wire and the boot-stomping Germans with their loud Sieg Heil comments, their raucous marching songs, and Heil Hitler greetings. We just pretended we didn't see or hear them. And we no longer paid attention to the splintering sounds of wooden stairs being ripped and pried out of homes by people desperate for wood to warm themselves. If we still heard the screams and curses from those who lived and would be trapped on upper levels, I wouldn't remember. We were even learning to avert our eyes and block our ears from the groans of the starving men and women collapsed on the sidewalks. They are dying, we said to each other, as if it was perfectly normal. One day, when a man walked by us with corpses piled up on a handcart, one of the older girls explained, "He's an undertaker. He takes the dead bodies away." And an older boy said, "Yeah, it's starvation, and my parents say we're next." I asked my mother that day if she thought we were going to die of starvation also. And she said, "No, we are not." She looked like some of the people I'd seen on the street, though. Her face showed dark hollows where she'd once had pink, round cheeks, and her body no longer felt warm and soft. Now, when she hugged me, I could feel her bones knock against mine. "We'll be all right. God will help us," she assured me, and I made myself believe her. But the next day, when I walked down the front steps to go to school, I almost stumbled over an old man who lay slumped on his side against the wall of our house at the bottom of the steps. He was not moving, and I yelled up to my mother. Both she and a neighbor, whom the neighborhood kids called Aunt Reek, even though she was not really our aunt, rushed out to see why I was yelling so. They looked down at the man. "He's dead," my mom said, and put her arms around me. "Starvation," Aunt Reek whispered, "and we're next." She glanced at my mother and exclaimed, "Oh, Meep, he looks just like your husband." I felt dizzy. That white-faced old man, wrapped in a torn, dirty old overcoat, looked like my dad? No, my mother shook her head. Nothing like him. "Come on." She took me by the hand. "I'll put on my coat and walk you to school." She turned to our neighbor. "You'll take care of him?" Hendrik nodded. "But you know they've run out of coffins." "Yes," my mother replied. "I hear they're storing the bodies in one of the churches. The old church, I think." On our walk to my school, my mother asked me how I was doing. I said, "Fine." But I needed to reassure myself. That man did not really look like Daddy, did he? Of course not. She looked at me surprised. "You see the photo of Daddy every day." I didn't know how to respond. Memory has a unique way of living in our various senses. I always thought I would never forget my dad's face, but the man in the framed photograph that my mother sometimes kissed at night now seemed almost like a stranger. I didn't kiss his picture, but sometimes I held his camera and I could feel his presence. The man who lived in that deep memory place made things with his hands. Rubber straps to hold luggage on the back of a bicycle. A bookcase with glass doors to hold the many books he and my mother liked to read. And shelves for above my bed. He smelled of rubber, wood, and paint. So different from my mother's citrusy scent of her favorite 4711 eau de cologne before she ran out of it. But that had been a completely different world. Now no one smelled good anymore, not even of soap, which had disappeared along with everything else that was sweet smelling. The city where he and I had walked to visit uncles Jacob and Abe now stank of trash, of sulfur smells of rotten eggs, of urine and unwashed, dying old men. Everything, absolutely everything, had changed since the ring of that doorbell when my dad was deported to Germany. His letters and photos had stopped coming a long time ago, but my mother still insisted that God would bring him back. And I made myself believe her. As long as I could still imagine the weight of his arm around my shoulder and remember his good smells, maybe he would. But sometimes I worried that he would be like the old men I saw on the streets. When my mother dropped me off at school and explained to the teacher about my almost tripping over the dead man, some of the other kids teased me for being late. Even in extreme times, little Dutch children of my era were taught to be punctual. "You're in trouble," the boy behind me whispered in my ear as he pulled my hair. I knew he liked me, but I didn't like him very much. I had heard him boast to another boy, "My father doesn't think it would be so bad if Germany won the war." The other boy had called him a traitor, and the teacher had to pull them apart when they began to punch each other. He pulled my hair again. I turned around and said, "Stop it." The teacher warned us to pay attention, proceeded with the class. We were just little school kids with the normal urge to laugh, tease, and play. But we were children of war, immersed in an environment of violence, deprivation, and hatred. Most of us were feeling hungry, cold, and scared. And some carried big secrets that we could not talk about. Some of my classmates and I lived in homes where subversive activities, punishable by death, were part of our everyday existence. In an effort to save human lives and undermine the enemy, our parents sheltered endangered human beings or used radio transmitters and printing presses to pass on information. Other children went home to parents who arrogantly displayed the German swastika. Our life stories were being formed in the flesh and bone of our experience. But whether the children of those who resisted the enemy or the children of collaborators and traitors, we would mostly remain silent as we wove the consequences of our parents' actions into the patterns of our own lives. One day, we would be named the silent generation, a generation of kids born during the Great Depression and World War II, a demographic minority that was squeezed in between our heroic parents who fought for world freedom and earned the name of the greatest generation, and the hordes of our younger siblings and our own children the baby boomers who would set out about to challenge and change the world as we knew it. So that's the end of that chapter. And I just want to end with that I chose this chapter because it was such a hard chapter and to show that we came through it. We were fortunate. My dad came back. We survived. The Jewish woman we hid survived. But the ghosts of war linger. And my dad came home with PTSD, and like many men after the war, longed for wide open spaces. And so by the time I was 13, we emigrated to Australia with thousands of other young Dutch families. And my second book is about being an immigrant, a teenage girl in Australia. And I just want to read the prologue to that book, the prologue and maybe one little paragraph, if that's okay. So the prologue to the second book. Intentions are like prayers, my mother said. My mother was a very strong woman, as you can begin to see. You send them out into the universe, and if you pay attention, they come back as destiny. When my parents, my sister, and I boarded the Dutch ocean liner, the MS Johan van Oldenbarneveld, to join the tsunami of post-World War II European migrants that took our family from Amsterdam, the city where I was born and thus far had been raised, to an unknown future in Australia, I had already decided on the woman I intended to become. I would be fierce, like my mother, beloved as my mother was by my father, and respected as she was by the World War II resistance workers who were her friends and contacts. I would be independent and stand up for those who were persecuted or deemed inferior, just as my mother had stood up to the Nazis and hidden a Jewish girl in our home. And I would become a swimming champion and work at a newspaper where I would write stories and marry a handsome newspaperman, just like the protagonist in the novel my friends from the swim club in Amsterdam have given me as a parting gift. I did not foresee the serendipitous ways in which 1950s Australia would both challenge and shape my innocent intentions into a destiny. I had not yet turned 14. And then I'll do just one more minute. I'm kind of jumping you all over the place. I just want to say, since I talked about place and talked about Amsterdam, I just want to give you a very, very tiny little insight into the first place where we lived in Australia. Our new home would be a tiny rural community, home to some 4 or 5 dozen people, called Kai Kai. It pleased my mother that the Australian Railways representative, my dad took a job with the Australian Railways so he could be in the open spaces, told her that Kai Kai was the Aboriginal name for food and water. Think of it as an oasis, he said, a stopover for food and water in the midst of the 90-mile desert. Ah, I will imagine a lush garden with fruit trees and clear spring wells, my mother said, smiling. It wasn't until we arrived in Kai Kai that we learned and understood the appropriate meaning of the name the indigenous people had given the place that would be our home. Grubs and water soakage. We had arrived in the Australian bush. And we would be there for a year before we moved to the city where my swimming career takes off, and
Mm.
write more about that. So thank you.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Well, oh no, I'm feeling as maybe others are here, so emotional. Hendrika, it was such a beautiful reading of really painful material and beautifully written material. Um, and the story has so much depth and breadth, your life story. And I really felt, as I'm sure others do here tonight, um, the emotion of war being taken out of abstraction, where it really is so weighing upon all of us, in our various countries right now, in a really immediate way. But you really take us into a really challenging place of a child's experience of having war come to its, beloved home place. And so it seems so challenging to think about how to begin this memoir. And I'm curious, and I know we have poets, we have memoirists, we have many writers here tonight. These are writers generally who come and are in our audience. And I would love to hear, perhaps you might be willing to share with us the conception of or the process of when you knew you were going to write this memoir. And what was your process of working through what I can only imagine were conflicted feelings about how to begin to tell this story on paper and think about publishing it?
Yeah. Um, yeah, that it's a big question. I didn't really, the memories were buried for a long time. When I was living in Australia, um, and you'll see this in my second book, Australia in many ways saved me. Having my teenage years there, I was very fortunate in being a strong swimmer. I belonged to a really good community. In fact, we're still in touch with some of these swimmers that I mentioned. Um, so that the memories were there, but I didn't really have to deal with them. When I moved to America with my then husband, and my father passed away, suddenly all the memories started bubbling up. And I even mention in my book somewhere, at that point, I was older than my mother was when she had to deal with the resistance, being in the resistance. When those memories started bubbling up, I went into therapy, and I started doing therapy. I went back to Amsterdam. I worked with an analyst in Amsterdam, worked in Dutch, and here in Santa Barbara, we have a lovely, once a year, we have a Santa Barbara Writers Conference, and I started just writing little pieces about the experiences. Um, in many ways, they were just therapeutic exercises. I didn't think of publishing the book at all. I was really more interested in writing, in putting my experiences on paper, and maybe also for my children. And then by that time, I was started to have grandchildren. Um, but then in the writers' conferences, people started being interested in them, and they started saying, "Why don't you publish?" And out of that grew the process of publishing. But I must admit, it was extremely painful at times. Actually, Maureen Murdoch's first book on memoir writing was my Bible for a while, because I kept thinking, if I'm going to write a memoir, what does that look like? And it, in that process, like I said, I gradually began to write the chapters down, and then through the writers' conferences and being in writers' groups, I began to think of publishing it. And so it was a long process. I mean, I didn't publish it till I was 80. You can tell, I kind of set on those memories. And,
So you're
and
just here to inspire us in 1,000 different ways tonight, Hendrika, right? Okay. You're
uh,
never too old to publish your memoir. And
no,
yeah, that's
no.
really, really beautiful. Well, John Murrow asks, I think he's probably gotten this question answered by now. Are you still living in Australia? And maybe the question, have you returned to Amsterdam, has been answered, but maybe when's the last time you went to Amsterdam and what was your perspective?
Oh, I went back to Amsterdam quite a few times because I had cousins there. I even write about it in my second book. I write how I take my first husband back there to meet people. And in a way, um, when I had my first child, it was like I always felt like there was a little war going on in me that I was part Dutch and part Australian when I was living in Australia. And everybody would say, "Oh, she's so Australian," or "So she looks so Dutch." And so I brought the two worlds together then. And I've been back to Holland quite a few times. And the very first time when I worked with an analyst, it was really hard. He made me walk, revisit the places where I'd had difficult experiences, and then we would talk about them in Dutch. Um, in fact, there was one incident that your listeners may like to hear. When I went back that time, I went to the market that I mention in my book where my dad worked and where his Jewish friends, who were my uncles and aunts, lived. Not real uncles and aunts, but called them that. And they were all murdered in the German camps. And so I had to go back and visit that market and really deal with the grief and the horrors of that. And I used to talk to people about the hunger winter. But we had, in those days, we had no pictures. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. And I would think sometimes, did I make that up? Did it really happen? And so I went to this market and I found a book of photos with the Hunger Winter, and they were photos that had been taken by people in the resistance movement, and who, of course, my mom worked there, and I had known people in the resistance movement, and I said to the person in the market, I said, "Oh, this is from the Hunger Winter," and she said, you were, do you know about the Hunger Winter? I said, yeah, I was there. And we started whispering about the memories. So
Mm.
it's like these memories, that live in us. So that was one chapter about the Hunger Winter that I started writing when I came home. And I took my kids back to Amsterdam to see where we lived and do the Anne Frank hiding place because we were within walking distance of that. So
Oh,
it's
goodness.
probably more than your readers want to know, but
Not at all. No, no, no. There's a number of questions here in the chat room, and so I do want to get to those. John Tours, if I'm saying your name correctly, John, do you see parallels from the 1940s today, or are things very different?
no, unfortunately, I almost started with an early chapter in my first book today, but it got to feel a little too complicated. Um, I see um, I see very, very similar things happening. People being rounded up, people being deemed inferior,
Mm.
um, being housed in places that are supposed camps or prisons. It scares me. It worries me, and I must admit, there's a part of me that says, really, 80 years and we haven't learned anything. So yeah, I do see similarities, um, I think we do need to be aware of that.
Thank you, Hendrika. And thank you, John, for your question. Molly Arbuthnot is asking, is place still important for you? If so, what place makes you happiest?
That's a wonderful question. By accident, I came to Santa Barbara with my youngest of my three children. Uh, she wanted to go to UCLA, and I had met some people who were doing a psychological program here that I liked. And I was going to stay here for 2 years. I was living in DC at the time, and it's now been 42 years, and I'm still here. And it's been a fabulous community. It's a wonderful, loving community. I love Santa Barbara. I'm grateful for it. I walk by the ocean every day, and my friends, the people here are just amazing, just amazing.
Now, is that where is was it in Santa Barbara? Where did you begin do your own training as a Jungian analyst? Did you do that in Europe?
No, no, I started in Washington, D.C., and I actually have a degree, a master's degree in theology. When my father died and my marriage broke up, and um, and my mother had been a very, very firm believer in God, but she did it in a very odd way because she also had dreams and omens, and you'll see that in my book. But I really went on a search for the feminine face of God. So I got a master's degree in theological studies, and from that I moved into Jungian. Then I got interested in Carl Jung and moved into Jungian studies and started Jungian analysis training in DC, and then came to Santa Barbara and got a counseling degree here so I could practice. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, so you are such an inspiration, Laura Engel writes. Your first memoir sounds so exceptional and powerful. By the way, Laura Engel has also written a beautiful, powerful memoir. Did you find it easier to write your second memoir?
No, that's such a good. I found it horrible because I really wanted to let her have a voice. I let the little girl have a voice in the first memoir, and I wanted the teenager to have her voice in the second. And she at times she was just awful. I mean, she just and at times she was sad and moody,
Mhm.
and I had to keep reminding myself that Henny, that was you when you were a teenager. So it was
Mhm.
actually harder to write.
Harder to sort of deal with that teenage boy. Oh my God, harder than writing about ch being a ch child in wartime was being a teenager. Okay.
I know.
Probably a
You
lot of us
have to
out
read
there.
the book to get it, I think.
Okay, okay, excellent. Jen Minotti has posted a question as well. As you know, epigenetic trauma passes down through generations. How do you feel writing your memoir helped your children and perhaps even grandchildren, if they're old enough to be aware?
Um, they definitely helped my children, and they wanted me to write the stories. They were very involved in the stories of our family. Um, my grandchildren, I have four of them. I'm not sure. I think two of them were very involved in their father's story and their own mother's stories, which were also had immigrant stories. Um, all I can say is they all read them, and and they like hearing the stories. Um, I think it's helped them look at their own lives, their own psychological issues, emotional issues. At least I like to think so.
Hmm.
But, they have their own lives. I try to I know with my kids, my three kids, we're very close and definitely they're very involved and they like the stories. And um, I told my younger daughter, who is quite a writer, that she can write my third book for me. But with the grandchildren, um, yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, there's certainly the unsilencing so that you've done. And
Yeah.
you mentioned being part of that silent generation. You mentioned being back, revisiting or finding the pictures of Hunger Winter, and you and this other person you were encountering started whispering. So um, there's been this unsilencing, and maybe that's part of what Jenna's getting at. I think maybe in her
Yeah.
question is um, so these
That's
stories
good.
are being told.
Yeah, that's good because it's like we always talk about let there be no secrets. Let's talk. That's and we do a lot of talking in our family. We have a habit of walking and talking. And even with my when my grandson, when his parents were divorcing, he came and stayed with us, and we went. He said, "Oma, I need to go walk talk," and we did our walk and talk so he could cry and process his feelings. So I think that definitely it has helped us be open about our experiences. That's a very good observation. I like that. Yeah.
I want to, before we close, you've been so generous with us. I want to mention your mother. She's such a compelling
Yes.
figure. Not, I'm sure, a perfect person, and never a mother-daughter relationship that's perfect. And I suspect that you went through other stages with her throughout your life. Um, but I want to mention her because I found um, her character in your memoir, her personhood, her bravery, her heroism, really, to be so moving. And the scene when she is being interrogated
Hmm.
by the uh, by the Gestapo, by the Nazis, I should say, by the Nazis who were really, or maybe they were collaborators because maybe they were just, I can't remember.
Yeah,
But
they were collaborators. Yeah.
okay, okay. So uh, this was a scene with such incredibly high stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's difficult and also incredibly moving to read about her bravery,
Yeah.
being a mother of a young daughter, alone in the starving times of this really war-stricken city, not knowing where the next meal is coming from, and her husband a POW, and you are watching her, witnessing her stand up to these officers.
Yeah. Hmm. I just posted on Facebook it was her birthday last week, and I just posted something about it. My mother was an exceptional woman. And in my second book, as a teenager, I talk about having to separate my personality from her strong personality and how I get to do that. And it was a struggle, and we did go, and I did separate myself and find my own personality. She, but she was amazing. And then we came through that. We after a few years, after I established my own, and my second book does talk about that. Um, she was smart. She was practical. She was very in that scene. Um, there's a later chapter in the book, as you know, where my uncle asked, "Why did you take that risk?" And she says, "Because I would hope someone would do the same for my child if the circumstances were in the opposite direction, if they were reversed." And she always had that, and she also knew that if she had revealed her contacts in the resistance, we would have been dead. So she pleaded innocence, a woman who just took in a girl because she was a woman alone, and she knew she very intelligent, very brave, an amazing woman, and her mother was too. They were a line of women that were quite something, um, and um, in my second book, I show how she gives my dad a year in the Australian bush in a house without running water, without power, where she's having to learn the language and because she was strong and loving and caring. And yes, I did have to struggle in my teenage years to find my own, who was I
Mhm.
as a woman. Yeah.
Hendrika, this, we could talk a lot longer. It's been absolutely riveting. Your reading was absolutely
Thank you.
gorgeous. Thank you. I know our audience has been enthralled, and so thank you. Now, I want you to relax and read some of the comments you haven't had a chance to read as we move into the open mic. I'm going to stop the recording.